Darkness in the rearview mirror. In the summer of 2013, I found myself driving home alone on Highway 902 from a party. It was almost midnight, and needless to say it was pitch black. As was usual at night, I was on edge. I had the radio off and could hear nothing but the muffled roar of tires on pavement and the dull hum of the engine. I stole a glance into the middle rear-view mirror, and saw nothing but darkness through the back window. I know that I looked backward and saw nothing, I'm sure of it. Just the seemingly endless blackness of the night. I remember it so clearly because not 10 seconds later a car passed me to the left, headlights on. I had one of those sudden adrenaline rushes like when you think you see a person outside your bedroom window when it's just a tree. Or when you start awake at night with the feeling of falling. 10 seconds earlier, nothing had been behind me. Suddenly, a car. I drove the rest of the way home shivering and knowing something was off. The next morning, I found 2 sets of scratches near the back of my van. One was on the left rear, one was on the right. The car was pretty old. They could have been there for months, but that was the first time that I distinctly remembered seeing them. In hindsight, there are 2 possibilities for what happened that night. Possibility 1, by some glitch in reality, or something paranormal. This other car had somehow appeared behind me within 10 seconds of me checking my mirror, like some weird ghost crap or something. However, the second option is what makes my blood run cold whenever I consider it. It didn't even occur to me until months after the fact. But it makes me dread driving alone at night even more. Possibility 2, the car was normal. It had approached me from the rear and passed me to my left. However, something large and wide, and as black as the night had been clinging to the rear of my car, obscuring my view through the window and leaving deep scratches on the sides, and I had inadvertently driven it home with me.
The Graveyard Challenge. Several teenage girls went for a sleepover at a friend's house, taking advantage of the fact that the parents were away. When they turned out the lights, they started talking about an old man who had just been buried in a nearby cemetery. It was said that he had been buried alive and could be heard scratching at the coffin, trying to get out. One of the girls scoffed at the idea, so the others dared her to go visit the grave right there and then. As proof that she had actually gone, she was to drive a wooden stake into the earth of the grave. The girl left and her friends lay waiting for her to return. But the hours went by and their friend failed to materialize. They lay awake, increasingly terrified. Morning came and the girl still had not appeared. So, when the parents came back, they all went down to the cemetery. There they found the girl lying on the grave, dead. When she had bent down to drive the stake into the ground, she had caught the hem of her skirt. Struggling to get up, she thought the buried man had grabbed her. It was concluded that she died of fright.
Was it people or was it aliens? Doug Averill grew up as one of 8 boys on his parents' sprawling dude ranch, the Flathead Lake Lodge, in rural Montana. As a teen, the Averill boys ran wild. We rode around as a little gang of cowboys, he remembers. They'd saddle up and head off to check cattle on the 3 giant tracts of land the family managed, which formed a triangle around some of the state's most remote rangelands. One summer in the 1960s, the brothers came across a ghastly sight there. On the ground were 3 dead cows neatly arranged in a circle. No obvious wounds were visible, but their reproductive organs had been removed, but there was never any blood. It was almost surgical removal. Averill remembers, during this decade, America was obsessed with aliens, and write-ups in the local newspapers posited that perhaps this was the work of extraterrestrials. People mused that aliens had taken the reproductive organs for testing, but one day, Averill and his friends came across a lance in their path. Attached to it was a cryptic note with a threatening message. That's when we thought, it's gotta be people doing this, he says. Then things got really strange. Over the next few days, a series of odd events unfolded. First, the brothers stopped in at a local bar to grab a hamburger, leaving their horses in the back of a stock truck. The horses were packed in tightly, and the Averills were only gone for a few minutes. When they came back, the horse packed into the middle of the truck was mysteriously out with no signs of a struggle. We had no idea how they possibly could have gotten that horse unloaded without unloading all the others, he says. The next day, a new wrangler on the ranch fell off his horse and was badly injured. They'd all been riding together, but not a single other member of the crew saw the accident. It was the weirdest thing, Overeel says. The man's injuries were so severe that he was left permanently disabled. Finally, the last terrible thing happened. An old camp cook drove out to meet the brothers and ride for a day. But when he arrived, the tailgate on his stock truck had somehow gone missing, even though it had been here when he'd loaded up his horse. Betsy had fallen out of the truck and been dragged behind the vehicle for who knows how long. They had to put her down on the spot. To be honest, it just killed him to see what had happened to Betsy. We probably should have put him down too, remembers Overeel. Those three events were just boom, 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 three things in a row that were so weird, all tied together, because they were right after we saw that spear, he remembers. Three things, like the three dead cows left in a circle. Overeel used to tell the stories from that summer around the campfire quite a lot. But over the years, he's gotten new stories, and so they've been shifted out of rotation. Besides, they're awfully grim. But he recently got a call about a downed bull, a buffalo. It was out in one of the most remote parts of his ranch. A neighbor had seen a pack of 16 wolves, and normally, wolves don't bother buffalo, but 16 of them. I thought, well, maybe. He went to investigate. There, lying in a snow-covered field, was the bull, but there were no bullet holes or teeth marks or gashes on its corpse. Even stranger, scavenging animals and birds hadn't touched it, not even the buzzards, which is really unusual, he says. One other thing was amiss: its reproductive organs were gone, and there wasn't a single footprint in the snow round it, or anywhere along the mile-long walk into the ranch from the nearest road. Ask Overeel whether he thinks he's dealing with aliens or humans, and he'll tell you he's pretty sure it's humans, but I'd rather it was aliens, he adds. After that summer back in the 60s, seeing what humans were capable of, he'd pick aliens any day.
How much for the girl? So, how much for the girl? I've dealt with punks like this one before, but I've never been this desperate. It shows in my voice. Sorry man, no can do. Come on, don't fuck with me. How much? Anger spews from my throat. I won't risk losing the girl. She deserves better than to live the rest of her life rotting. Look, I told you, we ain't sellin'. Now take your ass home, old man. My brow furrows. I keep pressing. Don't pretend there isn't a price. Just tell me what it is. I'll pay anything. How much for the girl? You really think she's special, huh? I nod. Well, here's the deal, man. We're about to shove off, and we're all set as is, so frankly, I think your best bet is to go walk the docks and try to find someone else. The girl isn't going anywhere. Capice? I look at the girl. Pretty young thing, just blossoming into a young woman, beautiful. I know it'll be wrong if I take her back home with me. It wouldn't be right, but I can't help what I can't control. Look, there is no one else. Now would you please listen to me, listen to reason. For a minute, she's perfect. I love her, I want to take care of her, so fuck. How much for the girl, you son of a bitch? Nah, we're done here, fuck you very much. Have a nice life, Gramps. Oh, and stay safe. Kids in the dark. Growing up poor in the deep south meant sharing a lot with my little brother, Ollie. Most often, we'd pass toys, clothes, and skin conditions between us. Up until he was 6, we even shared a bed. Neither of us was happy about that. It was my 10th birthday when that changed. I got one present that year, and it was a bed of my own. Ollie was jealous right away, and I could understand why. He had to keep that half-broken down frame with the worn-out mattress. The one I'd gotten wasn't much better, but not being broken and worn was enough. Sleeping apart was a great feeling. It was freedom, no longer would I have to suffer the sudden and inexplicable kicks to the stomach, no longer would I wake up with Ollie's foot pressed into my neck like he'd stepped on Dracula the night before. At least, that's what I'd thought, right away. Right after I got the new bed, the shriek started. At first I thought Ollie woke up in the middle of the night and screamed because he'd gotten scared. Then, the sound echoed through the tiny room again and I knew it wasn't a normal cry. The room was always black as pitch after sunset. The one window we had was pressed against a long-leaf pine and even the biggest, brightest moon cast no light inside. The shriek just about drove me crazy. Every night, probably at the same exact time, these sharp yelps would knock me right out of my dreams. It wasn't my mom or dad yelling either. I knew what that sounded like, believe me. Most worrying of all was the fact I could never tell where it was coming from. It seemed completely random. One night it'd come from somewhere near the closet, the next, it'd shoot out from a corner of the ceiling. Any hope I'd had of having my own space would get dashed every time as Ollie would silently slip into the bed with me, shaking like crazy. He'd clasp onto me and wouldn't let go until it was almost daybreak. Most times I'd take his hand and tell him everything was going to be okay, that it'd be over by morning, but I was never really sure. Over time, the shriek started changing. At first it was only by small degrees, but eventually it took on the primal hooting sound of a primate calling out its fierce warning. I had to clasp pillows to my ears just to keep from going deaf. Mom and Dad never believed me or Ollie, basically because the thing, whatever it was, refused to make a peep when they were in the room. Apparently they couldn't even hear it through the walls even though it was damn sure loud enough. The shriek just got worse and worse until I felt like I couldn't take it anymore. Me and Ollie were doing really bad in school, and we just had no energy at all. I could sleep more deeply with my head propped up and eyes open in the middle of class than in my own room at night. Then, thankfully, we moved out of the house nearly a year later. I had contemplated all sorts of things, even a child's clumsy concept of suicide. To get away from the horrific nightly noise, there was no problem at the next house. It was a nice white cookie-cutter home on a dead-end street, and I welcomed the normalcy. What's more, when we moved in there was a bunk bed waiting for me and Ollie. No more broken bed. No more second bed I ended up having to share anyway. The only problem was deciding who'd get the top bunk. I told Ollie I deserved it. After all, I had gotten a new bed way back, and he ruined it by climbing in every night. What? He shook his head. I never did that. I had always wondered why the noise stopped the second I was sharing my bed. Now I had the answer. Darkness in the rearview mirror. In the summer of 2013, I found myself driving home alone on Highway 902 from a party. It was almost midnight, and needless to say it was pitch black. As was usual at night, I was on edge. I had the radio off, and could hear nothing but the muffled roar of tires on pavement and the dull hum of the engine. I stole a glance into the middle rear-view mirror, and saw nothing but darkness through the back window. I know that I looked backward and saw nothing, I'm sure of it. Just the seemingly endless blackness of the night. I remember it so clearly because not 10 seconds later a car passed me to the left, headlights on. I had one of those sudden adrenaline rushes like when you think you see a person outside your bedroom window when it's just a tree. Or when you start awake at night with the feeling of falling. 10 seconds earlier, nothing had been behind me. Suddenly, a car. I drove the rest of the way home shivering and knowing something was off. The next morning, I found 2 sets of scratches near the back of my van. One was on the left rear, one was on the right. The car was pretty old. They could have been there for months. But that was the first time that I distinctly remembered seeing them. In hindsight, there are 2 possibilities for what happened that night. Possibility 1, by some glitch in reality, or something paranormal. This other car had somehow appeared behind me within 10 seconds of me checking my mirror, like some weird ghost crap or something. However, the second option is what makes my blood run cold whenever I consider it. It didn't even occur to me until months after the fact. But it makes me dread driving alone at night even more. Possibility 2, the car was normal. It had approached me from the rear and passed me to my left. However, something large and wide, and as black as the night had been clinging to the rear of my car, obscuring my view through the window and leaving deep scratches on the sides, and I had inadvertently driven it home with me. The Oneirophage. In the late 40s of the last century, after a decade of private research involving experiments with binaural beat brainwave frequencies, extrasensory cognition, and rare extracts of a South American vine, Dr. Tomás Rosner perfected a technique whereby one could actually intrude into the psyche and see another's thoughts. Despite having exhaustively documented his rigorous work, he could find no institution that would even offer to review it, forced to sell his invention. He found by word of mouth among those through whom he procured narcotics a prospective buyer, the bête noire of an old New York family, Mr. John M. Dunn, a voyeuristic connoisseur of the supernatural and the obscene, who had squandered his idle youth in the great libraries of Paris. Those catacombs of departed authors, rummaging among their hoards of dusty and obsolete works, a literary ghoul who disturbed with profane fingers the charnel houses of decayed philosophies, he readily agreed to the doctor's asking price without haggling. Delighted at the prospect of exploring such a bizarre novelty, once adept at the operation of the apparatus, Dunn paid Dr. Rosner off and under an assumed name rented a shabby house within view of Sing Sing prison, in the timeless night, while the convicts fitfully slept. With the aid of a set of stolen blueprints and his new mind-reading device, he raided their memories cell by cell at liberty to savor the forbidden thrill of thefts, molestations, moonlit homicides, in secret, without remorse or consequence. Within a month, the prisoners, telling each other about the nightmares from which they had all begun abruptly to awaken, discovered they shared striking similarities. First, processions of alligators and tortoises filed through a swamp crowded with faceless people and shrieking orchids. Next, a shadow man, at whom they looked directly but could never quite see, would watch them in utter stillness from an empty house while invisible hands probed behind their eyes as they had to stand naked, legs locked in place, unable to run away. Their compared descriptions of the house were identical, including its location just outside the walls. By mutual agreement, it was planned that the first of them to receive parole or be released would search this house out to find if it really existed, and investigate the source of their troubling dreams. A few days after being freed, their chosen spy was able to inform them with a smuggled message in code that not only was the house real, but he had broken into it at night and found a gaunt, mustached man in a silk smoking jacket seated bolt upright, head thrust back, both eyes gaping, mouth stuck open in a stiffened gasp, clenched hands gripping the arms of his chair, in front of a scientific machine. A handwritten journal on the desk told the whole story of his adventures, prying unconstrained through their psyches, plundering the haunted memories of criminal after criminal, seeking ever more shameful and audacious experiences until finally he wrote, on July 7, of his overwhelming desire to witness telepathically the next execution in the prison's notorious electric chair.
The haunted doll. When you think of haunted dolls, it's likely the creepy old Victorian-looking porcelain kind that springs to mind, none of which you probably have laying around. Still, don't get too comfortable around any kids' toys too soon. Though, a Disney's Frozen Elsa doll that was gifted for Christmas 2013 in the Houston area made headlines earlier this year when it seemingly became haunted. Per KPRC2 Houston News, the doll recited phrases from the movie Frozen and sang "Let It Go" when a button on its necklace was pressed. For 2 years it did that in English, Mother Emily Madonia said. In 2015, it started doing it alternating between Spanish and English. There wasn't a button that changed these, it was just random. The family has owned the doll for more than 6 years and never changed its batteries. The mother says the doll would randomly begin to speak and sing even with its switch turned off. The family decided to throw the creepy doll out in December of 2019. Weeks later, they found it inside a bench in their living room. The kids insisted they didn't put it there. And I believed them because they wouldn't have dug through the garbage outside, Madonia told KPRC2 Houston News. At that point, Elsa ceased to sing the English rendition of "Let It Go" altogether, speaking only Spanish when pressed. The family then double-bagged the bizarre doll and placed it at the bottom of their garbage, which was taken out on garbage day. They went on a trip shortly after, but when they returned, Elsa too had come back, and was waiting in the backyard of their home. This time, The family mailed Elsa to a family friend in Minnesota, who taped the haunted doll to the front bumper of his truck. It doesn't seem to have made its way back to Houston yet, as per Madonia's latest February Facebook update on the creepy doll.
Roommate troubles. This actually happened to me a few years back at the University of the Arts in Philadelphia, my sophomore year. I roomed with a girl named Kara. She was a jazz vocalist, but her main interest was opera. We had a small room on the 6th floor of a dormitory called Juniper Hall. The walls were thin, and her last night's singing and voice practices would keep me up late. After a month or so of lost sleep, I convinced her to move her last night practices to the music studios in the Merriam Theater building a block away, around 8 o'clock one evening. Kara announced that she would be practicing late for an upcoming recital and probably wouldn't be home until around midnight. Great, I thought, that means I can go to bed early. I was beat. I had a horrible day in acting studio, and was ready to pass out as soon as I had dinner. She said goodnight and left, coffee and sheet music in hand. I made some grilled cheese and soup, gobbled it down, and immediately began to prepare for bed. By the time I got out of the shower, my eyelids were so heavy I could hardly brush my teeth. I pulled on my PJs and crawled into the top bunk of our bunk bed. I was out as soon as my head hit the pillow. I should take a second to describe the layout of our apartment. When entering the apartment, the bedroom was through a door immediately to the left. Our bathroom was inside the bedroom, just past the bunk beds. UArts is nice in the sense that you don't have to share bathrooms. Anyway, I woke up to the sound of the apartment door closing. I opened my eyes and groggily checked my phone. Midnight on the dot. I rolled back over and closed my eyes. I heard Kara enter the room and stop in front of the bunk bed, checking to see if I'm actually asleep, I thought. She flopped down on the bed below me, which was strange, as she was a stickler for brushing her teeth and washing up before bed. Then again, exams were just around the corner, and we were all exhausted. The mattress below me creaked, and then was silent. I couldn't even hear her breathing. I started to drift off again. I was just on the edge of deep sleep when I was startled awake again by a noise, a key in the lock, the door opening, and Kara entering our apartment, humming an opera tune. The mattress below me creaked.
Skyping with my friend. The other day, I was talking to an online friend of mine over Skype. She said, "Some weird things have been happening to me lately." I replied with a quick, "Sure, tell me." I never really believed in this whole ghost or paranormal things up until now, so I'm a bit nervous, and I think I might just be overreacting. But the doctors haven't found anything psychologically wrong with me, so if you're just gonna think I'm crazy, then tell me now, 'cause I'll just leave. I could tell from her reluctance that this must have been really freaking her out. I assured her, "Okay, here it goes then," she said, and then typed up her story. It began a few weeks ago after I read some ridiculous chain letter that I didn't forward. I didn't think anything of it because, like I said, I didn't believe in that stuff, and the chain letter was something about creatures wearing human skin that blend in with humans. I don't know. I don't really think it's related, but it started after I deleted it. It first started at the market, while I was in line. I noticed that the bagger was staring at me. He was smiling a bit too uncomfortably at me, like, he wasn't using his muscles to smile. It was more like someone took 2 fingers to his cheeks and pulled upwards to draw the corner of his lips into a smile. I know that sounds way stupid, doesn't it? Anyways, I smiled politely at him and took my groceries from the end of the belt. When he finished bagging them, I freed up a hand and I thanked him for his service. And that's when it happened. His lips moved and he said in a deep voice, "You're welcome, miss." I stood there in complete shock for a moment. I figured I must have been exhausted because there's no way that just happened. The next day, I was walking down the street. The air was chill and cold, and I was enjoying all the smells and sensations of the upcoming fall. That's when it happened again. I saw a woman staring at me. She didn't take her eyes off me. She had that same eerie smile. It was uncomfortable. As she got closer to me, she parted her lips and spoke to me. "Nice weather today, isn't it, miss?" and then nodded and kept walking. I stopped in my tracks once more. It was dizzying because of its impossibility. Several other people spoke to me since then. It was always innocuous things like, "Need any help today, ma'am?" or "You're looking lovely today," nothing vicious. The strangers were all very friendly, albeit all with that same creepy grin, but the mere fact it was happening was terrifying and yet also strangely hope-bringing. Does that sound right? I don't know, but soon, everywhere I went, I would hear voices of certain people I was near, exchanging pleasantries with me. I even told my doctor this, and he assured me that no, it isn't possible that this could happen, and yet I know it is. It is happening to me. Frankly, I was confused as shit. I reported a missing person. 911, what's your emergency? I hesitated on the phone, all of a sudden a little shy. I had never called 911 before, and talking to new people always makes me antsy. I wished Tom were there, but, of course, that's why I was calling. I took a deep breath, cleared my throat, and answered, "Hi, my name is Terry Millerson and I'd like to report a missing person, Tom Smith, and how long has..." "I'm sorry, what was that name, Tom Smith?" No, I mean, what did you say your name was?" I sighed impatiently. "My name is Terry Millerson." "Look, Tom hasn't been home for over 12 hours, that may not seem like a lot, but that's a very long time for him. He never goes away that long without telling me when he'll be back. So can you just, Ms. Millerson, can you tell us your address?" I paused, uncertainty creeping in. "Why do you want to know my address, Ms. Millerson? Do you know where you are?" I covered up my embarrassment with a bit of bluster. "At home, obviously. And what address is that?" I lost my patience. "I don't know." "Okay. What does it matter? Look. Just find Tom so I know he's going to be okay. You got that, Ms. Millerson? Please tell us where you are. Your parents are very worried. We are coming to find you. Dash." At that moment, Tom walked in. I breathed a sigh of relief and hung up the phone just as he spied me. His face went red. But I didn't mind. "What the fuck are you doing? How did you get up here?"
The Crying Lady in the Dakota, New York, New York. Since its opening in 1884, the Dakota apartment building has been home to many rich and famous residents of New York City. Among them were John Lennon and Yoko Ono, who moved in 1973. John was also assassinated outside the building in 1980. Before that fateful day on December 8th, though, John said he saw a crying lady ghost walking the halls, and afterward Yoko, who still resides there, claimed she saw John's ghost sitting at his piano and that he said to her, "Don't be afraid. I am still with you."
A visit from the previous tenant back in 2014. I had a friendly ghost encounter at my old apartment in Gramercy, one of New York City's oldest neighborhoods. It was late fall, and I arrived home early from work on a slower day. After a 45-minute nap, it was around 4:30 p.m. I woke up not because of a blaring siren or a missed call, but because I felt the presence of a woman standing to the right of my bed. Situated in the far right corner of my studio, my family is superstitious, and I grew up conditioned to know what it feels like when a spirit is around. So I'm certain I wasn't dreaming. The woman, who I'll call Linda, why not, seemed kind, even as she kneeled down and whispered into my ear, "I burned. I died in a fire here in this corner," she said, the vision of her standing in a burning kitchen, one that fit the size of my own apartment built in the late 1800s, flashed across my mind. Milliseconds later, her presence was fleeting, her silhouette foggy. She was gone before I realized what happened. She never presented herself again. I don't believe she was trying to hurt me. She just wanted to be remembered. I opened every window in my apartment, and then went back to bed. Story 1. My mother attracted evil. After my parents divorced when I was a teenager, I lived with my mother. I experienced lots of paranormal happenings. Several times when I was reading in my bed, the room would start to feel really icy. Next, it would feel as if somebody that hated me was staring at me. When I got that feeling, I would leave the room and come back an hour later. Sometimes during the day, I would see a shadow figure sneaking along my bedroom walls. Something in the flat was pretending to be my dog. I went into my room and heard a deep growl from under the bed. My dog wasn't capable of making a noise that deep. It sounded like either a really big dog or a man doing his best dog impersonation. Other times, my dog would whimper and pace in the room next to mine, but wouldn't come when called, as if he was afraid of something in the hallway. When I moved in with my father, the paranormal activity stopped. Story 2, evicted by a ghost. Shortly after college, I got married. We immediately moved into a basement apartment because that's all that was available within our budget. This place had a poltergeist, and my wife was terrified. Whatever resided there with us made it clear it wanted to live alone. Dishes, glasses, and other items would fly off the shelf. My wife was hit several times. There was always an ominous feeling like we were being watched. At night when we walked through the apartment in the dark, there would be insanely bright flashes of light that would illuminate the entire room. One night while we were going to bed, as soon as my wife and I walked into the bedroom, we heard a voice from nowhere say, "My name." Move. My wife looked at me. I looked at her. I said loudly, "You've got it bad." We moved out 2 days later and stayed with family. The old lady who owned the place died a few months later, and the house was torn down. It is still an empty lot to this day, nothing but grass and a tree. I still drive by it every now and again. Story 3, the Death March. My dad used to work as a corrections officer at a rural prison. He drove the perimeter of the property for his entire shift, where he would check empty buildings for runaway inmates. It was generally a boring job. One night, my dad was parked on a hill reading a magazine when he started to feel a thumping in his body. He described it as the feeling you get when speakers are playing a song with really heavy bass. He put the magazine down and checked his rearview mirror, where he saw someone outside the truck. He grabbed his pistol and jumped out of the truck with his weapon drawn. Outside the truck, he realized it was a procession of Native Americans walking through the truck and directly through his seat, only to disappear at the exact spot he was sitting. He said it was clear they were ghosts because many of them appeared injured. This went on for a few seconds, and then the whole procession disappeared. He called the other perimeter guy on his walkie to try to explain, and the other guy almost immediately stopped communicating. Turns out the other guy had seen this happen before, but didn't believe in ghosts, so he wouldn't talk about it. Story 4, the Demon's Room. I worked as a forensic nurse in a hospital's lock-up unit. We had one older lady who swore she was being haunted and abused by a demon she would call Tiberius. So many crazy things happened while she was on the unit. We'd go into the room, do normal care, leave, and seconds later she'd start screaming bloody murder. We'd run into the room to find her looking like she'd been in a fight with a boxing champ. Bloody lip, black eye, markings all over her body, and no one ever saw her doing this stuff to herself. Things would get moved around the room by themselves. At one point, she was in protective restraints because the doctor thought she was hurting herself. There was no way she could have moved or done anything to herself while in these restraints. But new marks would always appear, or her tray cart would be across the room. The room was secure, so there was no way someone else was doing this. When we asked her questions, she'd just say it was Tiberius. After she was discharged, we always had trouble with that room. If there was going to be a rapid response or code, it happened in that room. One night a guard reported lights blinking on and off. It was that room. Story 5. Death came for him. I was standing in my parents' room, talking to my very sick dad at the time. He was dying of stage 4 esophageal cancer. I got the feeling something was behind me. I looked towards the doorway to the living room, and something about 4 feet 6 and fully black is peeking around the corner with its hands on the door frame. I ran towards it, and it slipped back around the door. When I got outside the doorway, there was nothing. My dad was completely confused when I stepped back inside the room. When I tell him, people who stayed at my house in my dad's final days claimed to have seen it. My mum saw the figure on multiple occasions in multiple places until he passed away. We haven't seen it since. It was good to see an old friend. When I was 37, I went to my high school reunion. I flew into the nearest airport and rented a car. The distance was about 35 miles through a very rural and almost abandoned part of the country. About 3 miles outside of town, I see someone on the side of the road, flagging me down. It turned out that it was one of the guys I had attended school with. Jim, not his name, gets in the car and we start talking. I had not seen him in 20 years, but he still looked the same, maybe a little older. We get to town and I ask him if he wants to come to the VFW and have a drink. He says no, just take me home. Jim's parents had lived only a few blocks from my grandmother's house, and I turned in that direction, but he said to take him to the outskirts of town. There was a mobile home park out there, and I figured that is where he lived. When we reached the end of the turn-off, he said, "Just drop me here. It was good to see you again," and he walks off into the night. I go to the VFW, met some of my old classmates. We start to talk. As we are talking about who is coming to the reunion, I mentioned that I had just picked Jim up 3 miles east of town and had dropped him off. Everyone gets quiet. Even the guy singing karaoke stops and lays down the mic. My cousin goes white as a new t-shirt. "Barb, Jim died on that curve 8 years ago. Rolled his car. We were all at his funeral. I was told." I started to feel really dizzy, and I went out to the car to take some deep breaths. There on the seat is the local newspaper, printed 8 years previous, containing Jim's obituary. I still have the paper. Story 6. Hell hath no fury, like a woman scorned. After we moved into our home, we were told a woman had died there at the hands of her abusive husband. She hated men. My dad would wake up with scratches all over himself, and whenever my brother was mean to my sister or I, he would have scratches on him as well. One day, my brother hurt our sister. He hit her with something. When he woke up later that night, he had a horrible bloody nose. The day we moved out, my brother accidentally broke his twin's arm trying out a wrestling move. He swears that he would have died that night if it wasn't our last in the house.
Guillotined, the French Revolution again. During all the beheading and overthrowing, a scientist by the name of Dr. Barrio was studying death. He asked a condemned prisoner, Henry Longwheel, who was about to be executed via guillotine, to blink as long as he could after his head was chopped off. He ended up blinking for 30 seconds. Need for Speed. Gordon Smiley, a cocky young driver from Texas, died during the 1980 to Indianapolis 500 qualifications as he attempted to break a record speed. He crashed into a wall head-on, 185 miles per hour. The doctor on site at the time, Steve Olvey, witnessed the crash and wrote about what he saw in his 2006 autobiography. While rushing to the car, I noticed small splotches of a peculiar grey substance marking a trail on the asphalt leading up to the driver. When I reached the car, I was shocked to see that Smiley's helmet was gone, along with the top of his skull. He had essentially been scalped by the debris fence. The material on the racetrack was most of his brain. His helmet, due to massive centrifugal force, was literally pulled from his head on impact. I rode to the care center with the body. On the way in, I performed a cursory examination and realized that nearly every bone in his body was shattered. He had a gaping wound in his side that looked as if he had been attacked by a large shark. I had never seen such trauma.
Buried alive. There was a woman in Kentucky by the name of Octavia Hatcher. After losing her infant son, she fell into a depression and eventually became ill with a sickness that resulted in a coma and her being pronounced dead. Over the course of the next few days, more local people fell ill, displaying the same symptoms as Octavia, but eventually recovering. It struck the village that Octavia may have had the same illness and her coffin was dug up, but it was too late. Octavia had been buried alive, and when they opened the casket, they found the lining of the lid torn from Octavia's bloody nails as she had attempted to claw her way out. She eventually died of oxygen deprivation, and a life-sized monument was erected above her grave by her grieving husband. Apparently, being buried alive was pretty common back in the day. Some coffins were made with air vents and a bell to ring if you happened to wake up. Raymond Robinson, a.k.a. Green Man, lost his face as a young boy due to an electrical accident. He somehow managed to live to the age of 74 despite having no eyes, mouth, nose, and only one ear. His severe disfigurement meant he stayed inside during the day, but his habit of going for long nighttime walks made him into an urban legend. Green Man. Raymond Robinson, a.k.a. Green Man, lost his face as a young boy due to an electrical accident. He somehow managed to live to the age of 74, despite having no eyes, mouth, nose, and only one ear. His severe disfigurement meant he stayed inside during the day, but his habit of going for long nighttime walks made him into an urban legend. Rainbow Valley. There is an accidental graveyard called the Rainbow Valley on Mount Everest. It got its name from the multicolored jackets and climbing gear attached to the numerous corpses littered along the hillside. People seeking to climb Mount Everest have to pass these colorful corpses on the way to the top. Over time, the mummified bodies have become goalposts for would-be climbers. Little Albert. Carried out by John Watson, the Little Albert experiment aimed to find out if fear was inherently ingrained or culturally taught. To find out, he essentially repeatedly traumatized a sick baby that he kidnapped every day from the on-campus daycare facility without its mother's knowledge by presenting it with soft, fluffy things, while slamming a gong with a hammer from behind a curtain to scare the child. The baby developed a phobia of white, fluffy things, and the experiment ended because Albert's mother found out and moved them away. According to relatives, Little Albert never learned to walk or talk, and eventually died at the age of 6. Jonestown Massacre. Probably the most well-known of these creepy historical facts, at least in pop culture. The People's Temple Agricultural Project, aka Jonestown, came to an end after the cult's leader, Reverend Jim Jones, forced 918 people in the town to drink Kool-Aid mixed with cyanide, chloral hydrate, Valium, and Phenergan. The events have often been referred to as mass suicide, but were really closer to a mass murder as all who drank the poison did so under duress, and a third of the victims were minors. It was the largest single loss of American civilian life in a deliberate act until 9/11. Jaw-dropper. When French revolutionary Maximilien Robespierre realized he was to be executed, he attempted suicide by shooting himself in the mouth. He was unsuccessful, and when they took him to the guillotine, the executioner ripped off the bandage holding his wounded jaw together, causing him to scream in agony before the crowd until he was silenced by the blade of the guillotine. Jaw-dropping stuff. Baby Farmer. Minnie Dean, a.k.a. the Baby Farmer, is the only woman to receive the death penalty in New Zealand. To make ends meet, she used to take in unwanted babies, many of whom either got mysteriously sick and died or went missing. Eventually, after a police investigation, it was discovered she had killed them and put their remains in hatboxes. She was found guilty of infanticide and hanged. Live forever. Shi Huangdi was the founder of the Ying dynasty and the first emperor of China. Like many powerful men, he decided he wanted to live forever, and so commanded his doctors to find the elixir of immortality, or they would be killed. His doctors shortly discovered the magic potion, and he set about drinking it daily. Unfortunately, he was actually drinking mercury, and eventually died from mercury poisoning. Whiskey business. While on an expedition into Africa during the late 19th century, James Jameson, heir to the Jameson Irish whiskey empire, reportedly asked to witness cannibalism in action. In order to make his horrifying desire a reality, he purchased a slave girl and handed her over to men who murdered her and feasted on her flesh. Jameson is said to have sketched out the gruesome scene, later turning his raw illustrations into a series of watercolors. Stanford Prison Experiment. One of the most well-known psychology experiments of all time, the Stanford Prison Experiment, was an attempt to investigate the psychological effects of perceived power. Guards and prisoners were chosen randomly from the volunteering college students, but the experiment quickly took a dark turn as those in power doled out psychological torture. The prisoners accepted it, and some started to go crazy. The whole exercise was abandoned after only 6 days due to questions of its morality, but continues to provide a benchmark for how quickly normal people can turn cruel when given authority. Hinterkaifeck murders. All 6 inhabitants of a farm were killed with a mattock in 1922. A few days prior to the attack, one of the victims had seen footprints in the snow leading from the edge of the forest to the farm, but none leading back. A newspaper appeared that no one had purchased. 6 months earlier, the maid had left, claiming the house to be haunted. The murders remain unsolved to this day.
Cameras don't lie. A teenage girl had been babysitting for the same family for a few years. The children were generally well behaved, and she enjoyed looking after them. One day the family called the babysitter with a special request. My sister and her husband died in an accident, and we have taken in their daughter. The father said, she is very quiet after what happened to her parents, but she is no trouble. Would you mind looking after her as well as the other children this Saturday? The babysitter said she didn't mind at all, and on Saturday evening, she went to the family's house. The children settled down in bed, and they all quickly fell asleep, except the niece. The little girl came back downstairs and asked if she could sit with the babysitter, because the monster that killed her parents wouldn't let her go to sleep. Thinking the little girl was imagining things, but understanding she had just lost her parents, the babysitter decided to let the little girl sit with her, seeing the babysitter's phone. The little girl asked if she could take some photos with it, and the babysitter said yes. The little girl cheered up, just a little, and walked around the room taking photos of her teddy in different spots and snapping sad-looking selfies. Every now and then the little girl would run back to the babysitter crying and asking her to chase away the monster to make the little girl feel better. The babysitter would pretend to chase it away. After a while, the little girl could stay awake no longer and fell asleep on the sofa. The babysitter carried her up to bed, tucked her in, and went back downstairs. She picked up her phone with the intention of deleting the photos the little girl had taken, but when she began to look at them, she let out a scream. In each of the selfies the little girl had taken, behind her, there was a pair of red eyes staring out of a monster's face. The sleepover. When I was a child, I lived on a street with a haunted house. A large and happy family had lived in the house until one night when one of the children was playing with matches. The youngest boy of the family dropped a lit match on his bed, but was too scared to call out for help. The boy was burned alive under his covers. His parents and 2 sisters died with him in the flames. One evening during a sleepover, my friends and I took turns trying to scare each other with ghost stories. It was approaching midnight and, unable to scare each other, we thought it would be fun to go to the haunted house in the dark. We walked through the gate, together and up to what remained of the door. Still set in its stone doorframe, the smell of smoke hung in the air, and thin clouds of ash were being blown in the breeze, but then we realized there was no breeze. Shapes began to form in the clouds of ash, and grey hands reached out from the shapes. As we turned to run, screams rose up out of the ashes. Help us, we're burning, they cried. We started to run, thinking that as soon as we were clear of the house, we would be safe. But the ash shapes and screams followed us as we neared my home. The smell of burning was almost overwhelming, and as we reached my door, I glanced over my shoulder to see a hand reaching for me. We piled through my front door, slamming it behind us, and ran up the stairs to my room, slamming that door tight, too. None of us expected to sleep, but the fear had exhausted us, and we fell into a deep slumber. The next morning, in the daylight, we were all much braver. During breakfast, we talked about what happened and came to the conclusion our imaginations had taken over. We decided to walk back to the house in the daylight. I opened my front door, and my mouth dropped in a silent scream. There, on the door, were two large round scorches high on the door, like someone had pounded on it with burning hands. Lower down, there were two smaller sets of handprints, as if children with burning hands had pushed against it. Finally, near the bottom of the door was a tiny set of burnt handprints, as if the youngest little boy had tried in vain to push open the door and get help for his family. The demon Hello Kitty. Do you know why Hello Kitty doesn't have a mouth? No, well, let me tell you. The woman who invented Hello Kitty has a daughter. Her daughter developed a rare form of cancer in her mouth, and the doctors told her mother there was nothing they could do. Her daughter was going to die. The mother was inconsolable. Her daughter was her only child, and she couldn't imagine living the rest of her life without her. She vowed to do whatever she could to save her. When the little girl was just hours from death, the mother was visited by the devil. He told her he would save her little girl if she promised to invent a cartoon character that would end up in every home. The mother was suspicious. Why would the devil request that she create a cartoon character that would bring joy into the world? The devil's intent wasn't to bring happiness into the lives of children. After all, the devil said he would use the character to hypnotize children and possess them. The mother was torn. Should she save her own child and sacrifice all those innocent children out there? Because of her intense love for her children, the mother agreed, and her daughter recovered. In return, the mother invented Hello Kitty. The character has no mouth because her daughter's mouth was eaten away by the cancer and sewn up. It has pointy ears like the devil's horns, and the word kitty means demon. So when you say Hello Kitty, you are actually saying, hello demon, and welcoming the devil into your home. Guard dog. This is a story about when a girl's parents left her alone overnight for the first time. The parents told the girl to make sure all the doors and windows were locked tight after they left, and not to open the door to anyone while they were gone. The girl did as she was told, and after her parents left, she went around and checked all the windows and doors. They were all locked tight. By 10 o'clock that night, the girl was bored being in the house on her own. She decided to go to her room with a big bowl of popcorn and get comfortable in bed. Not long after she got settled, she began to doze off and was awoken with a start when something touched her hand. It was the dog. The family's husky had come upstairs and licked her hand while she slept. The girl went back to sleep, but was awoken again. This time she knew straight away what had woken her up. It was a tap in the bathroom. Drip, drip. Dripping, she reached down to her husky, who licked her hand while she fell asleep again. Every hour or so, the girl was awoken by the dripping tap, but because she had stayed up so late, she was too tired to go and turn it off tightly. Instead, she would reach out to check for her husky and it would lick her hand while she fell asleep. It was just after 6:30 the next morning when she could stand it no longer and got up to turn off the tap. She walked into the bathroom and screamed. There was her husky, dead, skinned, and hanging from the ceiling. The sound hadn't been the tap. It had been her dog's blood dripping onto the floor. The girl ran back to her room to phone for help. There on her floor, written in her dog's blood, was the message, humans can lick too. An engagement photo surprise. My childhood best friend's mum was a photographer, so sometimes she would take us to cool locations and we'd play while she worked. One couple wanted engagement photos in front of a haunted house, so off we all went. It wasn't one of those Halloween amusement park why haunted houses. It was an actual abandoned mansion that was supposedly haunted. I thought that there was no way ghosts are real, and wasn't scared at all. My friend and I played around the house, and the day went off without a hitch. Then my friend's mom got the photos developed, and that's when things got weird. At first, it just looked like a smiling, happy couple in front of an old house, but if you looked really closely, you could see white, smoky-looking figures in a couple of the windows, and if you looked super closely, you could vaguely make out facial features. We definitely hadn't seen them there that day, but the camera picked them up. It sounds crazy, but I've been a believer ever since.
Banshee, Ireland. The bearer of unfortunate news, the Banshee, Bean Seed means fairy woman, is a fairy from Irish folklore that wails outside a home to warn the imminent death of a family member. She's also depicted as an old, deathly woman with a pale face covered by a veil. Despite her spooky appearance, apparently, she means well and foretells death to give other family members a chance to prepare. But whatever her intentions are, we think no one would like a visit from her anytime soon. Alp, Germany. Originating from German folklore, the Alp is a malevolent, vampiric spirit that has the ability to shapeshift into cats, dogs, snakes, butterflies, and pigs. This male demon appears in the nightmares of men, women, and children. And in the old days, people believed Alps caused sleeping problems, such as sleep apnea, sleep paralysis, and sleepwalking. Unfortunately, it only resides in dreams, making it almost impossible to kill. Chimera, Greece. In Greek mythology, the chimera is a three-headed, fire-breathing hybrid monster with the head and body of a lion, the head of a goat on its back, and a tail that ends with a head of a snake. The legendary beast is the child of Typhoeus, the mightiest and deadliest monster, and Echidna, a half-snake, half-woman creature. Ancient Greek and Roman art have often shown this beast being slain by the hero Bellerophon while riding the winged horse Pegasus. Chupacabra, Puerto Rico. Back in the 1990s, the legend of the chupacabra, goat sucker in Spanish, began when goats and chickens turned up dead in Puerto Rico with their blood completely drained. The folktale spread through Mexico and the U.S., where deaths of livestock also occurred. The chupacabra apparently looks like a coyote with mange, a horrible skin disease. Other accounts describe it as a gray, lizard-like creature with large eyes, fangs, and muscular hind legs that help it walk upright. Baizhou, China. A supernatural beast from Chinese mythology, the Baizi, white marsh, resembles a white ox with 6 horns and 9 eyes, 3 on its head and 3 on its broad sides. Though its appearance can give kids nightmares, it's actually considered a good omen and symbol of good luck, only appearing in countries where the leader is wise and virtuous. It can also speak human languages and is believed to have had an encounter with Huangdi, the Yellow Emperor of China. Manananggal, Philippines. Popular in the western provinces of the Philippines, the Manananggal, from the Tagalog word tanggal, meaning to split, is a hideous, vampire-like creature. When it transforms at night, it grows wide, bat-like wings and can sever its upper torso from its lower body. Legend has it that this monster preys on people sleeping, and pregnant women then sucks the heart of fetuses and blood of victims with its elongated tongue. It can be killed by sprinkling salt or putting crushed garlic on its severed lower torso. Ushi-oni, Japan. With its fair share of strange monsters, yokai, and gigantic beasts, kaiju like Godzilla, Japanese mythology and folklore are known worldwide. Ushi-oni, ox demon, is one of the mythical monsters that once haunted Japan and particularly terrorized fishermen out in the sea. This mysterious yokai is depicted differently depending on the region. In Shimane, it looks like a crab with the body of an ox, while in Shikoku, the Ushi-oni has tusks and flying squirrel-like wings. Baba Yaga, Russia. In Slavic folklore, the Baba Yaga is portrayed as an old, skinny witch with dark magic and flies on a mortar instead of a broom. Also known as a forest spirit, she offers guidance to those who seek her help respectfully. Stories about Baba Yaga teach children about reverence to nature and its spirits. On the other hand, some people see her as an antagonist that kidnaps and enslaves those lost in the forest. Parents sometimes use her name to frighten their children from wandering far from home.
The Bell Witch, Adams, Tennessee. If you're a scary movie lover, you might actually know about the Bell Witch. The films An American Haunting and The Blair Witch Project are both based on the story. Way back in the early 1800s, a man named John Bell moved his family to an area in Tennessee called Red River, which is now known as Adams, Tennessee. After they had settled in the new home, some peculiar things started happening. The Bell family began hearing some bizarre noises, including dogs barking, chains rattling, rats chewing, and a woman whispering. Soon, that woman became known as the Bell Witch, and many people believe she's the ghost of a former neighbor of the Bells, Kate Batts. Batts and the Bells had a dispute over land, and she had sworn vengeance on the Bell family before she died. Later on, Bell died from poisoning, and it's rumored to be the work of the Bell Witch. The Ghosts of the Crescent Hotel, Eureka Springs, Arkansas. Spend the night in the haunted Crescent Hotel in Eureka Springs, Arkansas, which opened in 1886. During construction, a worker named Michael was killed, and his ghost reportedly still haunts room 218. The hotel came under the ownership of known medical fraud Norman Baker in 1937, who fancied himself a doctor. He turned the hotel into the Baker Cancer Hospital, claiming to have the cure for the disease. He did not, obviously. Patients who died under his care were buried right in the hotel's basement, which served as a makeshift morgue. He was arrested in 1940, but his patients' spirits are said to still remain. Because the hotel is still open, guests often say they see apparitions and hear noises during their stays. Sci-Fi's Ghost Hunters even has footage of something moving in the basement. Huggin, Molly, Abbeville, Alabama. It's best to stay home when the sun sets in Abbeville, Alabama, if you want to avoid Huggin, Molly's chilly embrace. As the legend goes, beginning in the early 1900s, an oversized figure clad in all black began roaming the streets at night looking for unsuspecting victims. Once she fixates on someone, she hugs the person and screams loudly into their ears. Many people have recounted stories of being chased by what they believe was Huggin' Molly. Local parents have even taken advantage of the story to keep their children in line. The town embraces its nighttime warden, proudly calling itself the home of Huggin' Molly. There's even a family-friendly restaurant named after her. The Surrency House Ghost, Surrency, Georgia. The Surrency clan began experiencing paranormal activities in present-day Surrency, Georgia, in the 1870s. Family members reported witnessing objects soaring across rooms, hearing laughter and crying, and seeing red eyes staring into the house. Food was thrown from their plates and utensils twisted into unusable shapes. The townspeople speculated that these occurrences were cries for help from spirits who thought the family would be able to save them. On the day the family decided to finally leave the house, a fire iron allegedly floated up and started hitting one of the sons on the head. No one was ever brave enough to live in the house again, and the building went up in flames in 1925. The Ghost of Bellamy Bridge, Marianna, Florida. For a taste of true haunting love, travel over this spooky bridge in Marianna, Florida, which has several ghost legends surrounding the structure. In the 1830s, Elizabeth Jane Croom Bellamy married local politician Dr. Samuel C. Bellamy. On their wedding night, her dress accidentally caught on fire, which covered the young bride in horrible burns. She initially survived, but eventually passed away. Elizabeth was buried along the banks of the Chipola River, and it was said that her love for her husband was so strong, she couldn't rest. The deceased newlywed, dressed in white, can allegedly be seen wandering the banks from the vantage point of the bridge, which was built after she died. It's said that she appears on fire either walking through the swamps or diving straight into the river, as if to douse the flames, or somberly walking along the side of the river. The ghost of Deer Island, Biloxi, Mississippi. Back on May 20, 1922, Anthony Ragusin, aka Mr. Tony, relayed this tale in a column in the Sun Herald. He writes that in the early 1800s, two fishermen spent the night on Deer Island off Biloxi's coast. They heard noises that they ignored until it became impossible to do so. When they went to see what was causing the ruckus, they claimed they found a headless skeleton that ran after the pair. They immediately made a beeline for their boat and got off the island immediately. It's said that the bony frame belongs to a pirate who had his head chopped off by his captain, and his body was left behind as a ghastly guard to watch over buried treasure. Zombie Road, Wildwood, Missouri. Outside of St. Louis lies Zombie Road, a hotbed of ghostly activities. There are many scary stories stemming from Lawler Ford Road, its actual name, from sightings of indigenous spirits wandering the stretch to victims of train accidents. There used to be active tracks there, like Della Hamilton McCullough, who was struck by a passing train. In the 1950s, it became a popular late-night teen hangout spot, with various murders happening in the area, too. It's also been rumored to be the home base of a murderer named Zombie, who escaped a mental asylum. These days, the stretch has been rechristened as a nature trail, but it's closed once night falls, with hefty fines for those who dare to trespass. Dead Woman's Crossing, Weatherford, Oklahoma. This one's a regular murder mystery turned ghost story, according to Atlas Obscura. In the early 1900s in Weatherford, Oklahoma, Katie DeWitt James left her home with her baby after she filed for divorce from her husband. She planned to move in with her cousin, but her family never heard from her. After an investigation, it turned out that she moved in with local prostitute Franny Norton. She was last seen leaving the house with Franny and her child in a carriage. Franny returned with the child, who was covered in blood, but without Katie. Her body was found later, along a nearby creek, with her head cut off. It was rumored that her ex-husband had her killed with Franny's help, but Franny claimed she wasn't involved in Katie's death. But on the day she was supposed to be questioned by the police, she poisoned herself. Katie's still around though. She allegedly appears as a blue light floating around town, and people have reported hearing a woman looking for her baby and the rolling sound of wheels.